Was I muted the entire time? Is this the first thing you guys can hear?
Yeah, you're muted.
Awesome,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay, welcome to Deeper Than Dogma, everybody. Today we have a presentation from Floyd FP regarding the nativity story in the Gospel of Luke and the challenge to whether or not it is inerrant or not. Um, these are always fun topics because it kind of challenges a part of the whole discussion that I am not too familiar with, mainly regarding things along the topic of historical criticism of the Bible. So I'm looking forward to this, and with us today, of course, is Floyd making the presentation, and we're also right now joined by Dave S. Hi guys, how are you guys doing?
Hello.
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Oh, good, good. I also might be joined a little bit later on, but for anybody that's watching this, live chat's going in the external chat here. We will any questions there that regarding the presentation, I will jot down. We can ask a couple of them at the end of it. And anybody that wants to make any rebuttals or any comments regarding Floyd's presentation, we welcome it. Contact me, contact Floyd if you want to make a rebuttal video, if you have a rebuttal comment. We really want to have a dialogue over this topic. So we welcome it. And on top of that, we're also going to be running a after hang where we'll invite any people in that want to also discuss this. So that being said, Floyd, take it away.
Okay. All right. So can you see my screen share?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to be discussing the Luke nativity story. It's found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. And okay, so I'll start. So the title is the nativity story in Luke's Gospel inerrant? So what does inerrant mean? Inerrant means simply without error. So that raises a question. Well, what do we mean by no errors? Are we talking no spelling errors, no no grammatical errors? What exactly do we mean by no errors? Well, what I mean by no errors is basically factual errors, historical errors. Logical errors, and the standard which I'm going by for inerrancy is something formed by evangelicals, and it's called the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. The statement was formulated in 1978 by approximately 300 evangelical scholars at a conference sponsored by the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. It was held in Chicago. The statement was designed to defend the position of biblical inerrancy against the trends toward liberal conceptions of Scripture and higher biblical criticism. The International Council of Biblical Inerrancy produced three major statements: one on biblical inerrancy in 1978, one on biblical hermeneutics in 1982, and one on biblical application in 1986. As I mentioned, there were approximately 300 evangelical scholars that kind of created this thing. It was like the who's who among evangelicals. You had people like R.C. Sproul, Glenn Archer, Norman Geisler, Greg Bonson, Hal Lindsey, uh, 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 D. James Kennedy, many popular and kind of well-established evangelical theologians and scholars. Okay, I'm not going to read you what those documents said, but I'm just going to briefly paraphrase some of the key statements to articles that they make, which I think are relevant, to the topic. One's the short statement of the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. It says that Scripture is without error or fault in all its teaching about the events of world history. So the Bible is without error in regards to world history. Article 11 says, we affirm that Scripture is infallible in all the matters it addresses. In Article 12, it says, we affirm that Scripture in its entirety is inerrant. We deny that biblical infallibility and inerrancy are limited to spiritual, religious, or redemptive themes, exclusive of assertions in the fields of history and science. So they're saying that the Bible is not only inerrant about spiritual, religious, salvation matters and so forth, but it's also inerrant about historical and scientific claims that it makes as well. This is, I guess, what's unique about inerrantists over someone like Catholics, for example. Catholics would say the Bible is inerrant in regards to spiritual and redemptive themes, but not necessarily historical or scientific themes. And Article 14 says, we affirm the unity and internal consistency of Scripture. So that simply means that there are no internal contradictions. There's not one verse that contradicts another verse anywhere within the Bible. And then finally, Article 14 of the Chicago Statement on Biblical Hermeneutics, it says, we affirm that the biblical record of events corresponds to historical fact. We deny Scripture was invented by the biblical writers or by the traditions they incorporated. So basically, they're saying they deny that the Bible writers made it up, that there's any fiction in it, that that's something they just made out of their own imagination. They believe all the recorded events within the Bible correspond to actual history.
And when it comes to the challenge that you're levying here against the Gospel of Luke, that's kind of like the important part to kind of focus on, that last statement there, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're gonna look at the nativity story, see if it corresponds to historical fact. We would see if anything was invented. Also, Article 12 will be important. Or actually, I should say 14 and right above it. Are there any contradictions? Does the nativity story contradict any other passages in the Bible? And there is the Matthew nativity story, so we're going to be taking a look at that. The reason why biblical inerrancy is so important to evangelicals is because to them, the Bible is their foundation. Some go as far as say it's their foundation for their epistemology. So, it's not to them it's not a book about God. For them, it's a book from God. That this is divine revelation, from a perfect being. So therefore, if it's a divine revelation from a perfect being, it itself must be perfect. I remember I heard a fundamentalist preacher say once that if we cannot trust the Bible on things we can verify, how can we trust the Bible on things we cannot verify? So if the Bible's incorrect about historical events like the census found in the Luke nativity story, how can we be sure that Christians can be saved, or their sins are forgiven, or Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God right now? Those things we cannot verify. So if we can't trust the Bible on historical events that we can verify, how can we trust it on things we cannot? So it's very important to the evangelicals who hold to sola scriptura, Scripture only, rather than church tradition. All right, so there's two criteria for inerrancy I'm basically going to be looking at. One is, does the Luke nativity story match the events of world history? So in other words, does it contradict the historical record? Does it contradict what the known historical facts we actually have about the period? And then two, is the Luke nativity story internally consistent with other scripture? So as I mentioned before, I'm going to be looking at whether or not does it contradict Matthew's nativity story. So again, this criteria is part of the Chicago Statement. So these are things that evangelicals who are the Chicago inerrantists would think is very important. Okay, here is the relevant verses that that we'll be looking at. This is the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, and I'm just going to read verses 1 through 7. It says, "Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census will be taken of all the inhabited earth. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. Joseph also went from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and the family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn." All right, so there's 3 points I think we need to focus on in regards to these verses. One is that Augustus decreed a Roman Empire-wide census. 2, that this is the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And then 3, everyone in the Roman Empire had to register for the census in their ancestral hometown. In the case of Joseph and Mary, they had to travel from their own town of Nazareth to the town of Bethlehem, where Joseph's ancestor, King David, lived 1,000 years earlier. So those are the things we'll be looking at. Okay.
So before we just continue on here, just because we've got a few more people watching now compared to when we started, I'm just going to just put the message out there again that if anybody has any questions, comments, or anything towards Floyd during this presentation, feel free to type it in the live chat or send me a private message. We will address them on the show. We will bring them up, and if anybody feels like they want to respond with a video or anything like that, feel free to let us know, and we do want to carry this conversation forward and actually open up kind of a dialogue regarding this topic. So, sorry, continue.
Yeah. All right. So it mentions Joseph's own city. What is that? Well, according to Luke, it's Nazareth in Galilee, and we have three verses or 3 sections of verses to support that. One's in Luke 1:26-27, where it says, "Now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city in Galilee called Nazareth." This is the 6 months of Elizabeth's pregnancy. She's pregnant with John the Baptist. To a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the descendants of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. So here, before Mary's even pregnant, she gets a message from the angel Gabriel that she will be. So this is even before she's pregnant. And Luke 2:4 says, "And Joseph went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth." So they're actually still in Nazareth at the time. And then in Luke 2:39, it says, "When they performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth." So that's key there, to their own city of Nazareth. So their hometown is Nazareth. That's where they've been living. And this is somewhat confused with Matthew, because in Matthew they actually start out in Bethlehem. It actually says, the Magi visit them in their house in Bethlehem. So we're going to take a look at that a little later. All right, let me give you some historical background of what was taking place around 1st century Palestine at this time. So from 37 BCE to 4 BCE, Herod the Great ruled over his kingdom, basically what do you call it, Judea, but it's everywhere within this purple area here. So Herod the Great's kingdom stretched from Judea in the south, which included Jerusalem and Bethlehem, up north through Galilee and all the way over to the east there, There's different regions in there, typically called Batanea. Right above this area was Syria, and Syria was under direct Roman rule. So Syria had different governors ruling over that territory directly from Rome. Um, but but the kingdom of Herod's was a Jewish kingdom. They were what's called a client kingdom of Rome, um, but they're pretty much on their own. Herod would basically pay Rome a annual tribute uh, once a year, but Herod was called the King of the Jews. He was called King of the Jews by Augustus. So they had their own autonomy. They were not under the direct rule of Rome at all. Even though they kind of were subordinate to the Roman Empire. In 4 BCE, Herod dies. So he dies, and he wills his kingdom to his 3 sons. So his kingdom is split up between his 3 sons. In the south, in the pink area there, is Judea. That was given to Herod Archelaus. In the green area, the 2 areas there, Galilee and Perea, it was ruled by Herod Antipas, and then to the east there in the orange, it was ruled by Herod Philip II. So those were Herod's son. And then in 6 CE, because of Archelaus's misrule, the Roman Empire removes him. And at this time, Quirinius becomes governor of Syria, which is, again, under direct rule up north, and they annex Judea. So for the first time, Judea comes under direct Roman rule. And also at this time, Herod Antipas still had his client state as well as Philip. So the only region that was actually affected by this in 6 CE was Judea, which basically became an annex of Syria. And at this time that we read in the Luke story, because Quirinius calls a census, and this typically happens when the Roman Empire took over a province. Well, for taxation purposes, they had to perform a census. They had to figure out, well, how many people we have here. We have to tax them. That's how, obviously that's how we make our money. So as the story goes, Joseph and Mary had to travel from Nazareth, which is in the client state of Galilee, into Judea to the town of Bethlehem, simply because Joseph's distant ancestor, King David, was born there. So this is basically a 80 to 100 mile hike under rough terrain. So it would take at a minimum 3 days. It could take up to a week and a half to travel. But according to the Luke Nativity story, this was required for the census.
One of the points that you kind of brought up earlier that I think we'll probably just reiterate now, and I think we'll probably do it again, is that when they talk about him just having to go back to his ancestral home, we're not talking about just the place that he was born. And we're talking about a place that he is literally separated from by 1,000 years.
Right. Imagine if I was related to Elvis and the United States had a census, and because I'm related to Elvis, I had to travel to Graceland for the census. No, I mean that wouldn't. Honestly, that doesn't seem to make sense at all. Why would the government care about where some distant ancestor of mine lived? What would be the purpose? They want to tax you where you actually live, where your business is, what property you owned, where you actually reside and have assets. So yeah, so you basically identified one of the problems, but there's other problems as well. So I'd like to mention them now. So here are the historical errors I have identified. One, the census was limited to Syria and Judea under Quirinius's jurisdiction. He was reigning as governor from 6 CE to 12 CE, which did not include Galilee, and it was not a Roman wide. It was not a Roman Empire wide census. So the first error here is this was not a worldwide or emperor or empire-wide census or decree. It was the historical record shows this has only affected Syria and Judea. So, and despite having good records of the reign of Augustus, we have no record of any such worldwide census. And some authorities, such as the Monumentum Ancrinium, the Dio Cassius, and Suetonius make no mention of any worldwide census. So that's one problem. It was simply limited, the census was simply limited to Syria and Judea. Two, another problem, Joseph and Mary would not be affected by the census since they lived in Galilee. Roman censuses were not administered in client kingdoms. So, imagine if you lived in Canada, for example, and there was a census in the United States. Imagine that, if you live in Canada, would you have to travel to the United States if your great-great-grandfather lived in the United States?
Only if I had an ancestor that lived there within the last 1,000 years.
Yeah. So again, you wouldn't have to cross the border, into the United States if some great grandfather of yours lived there. And then three, the Romans never required anyone to travel to the homeland of some ancestor to be taxed. So we just mentioned that. German Protestant theologian Emil Schuler writes, in a Roman census, landed property had to be registered for taxation in the locality within which it was situated, and the person to be taxed had to be registered in the place where they lived or in the chief town of his taxation district. So basically, they want to tax you where you live. They don't care about where your ancestor lives. They care about where you actually own property and where you work and where you have assets. So that's what they're interested in. And also,
one of the things that I've heard come up before is that because this was ancestral homeland to them, that it was possible that Joseph maybe owned property in Bethlehem or something along that lines. I've heard that as kind of an apologetic to counter this, but there's still problems within that, like why did they have to stay in a manger or an inn in the first place if they owned property out there, and not just that, but there's even within, I think, the Gospels himself, Jesus had a very modest upbringing, not the thought of his father owning property or Joseph owning property in multiple towns doesn't really go with the whole narrative of his very common upbringing.
Right. If they actually owned a home in Bethlehem, why didn't they stay there? If they have a home, well, just go in their house and Mary can give birth. Or what's the idea of putting baby Jesus into a feeding trough? That's what a manger is. It's a feeding trough. It's where animals eat. It says they had no room in the inn. And two, the Luke story doesn't say such. It says their hometown was in Nazareth. Also at this time, there were many diaspora Jews. Jews lived all over the Roman Empire. In fact, and like today, there were more Jews living outside of Judea than actually lived within Judea. So to require all those people to travel to Judea, it's just unrealistic, and this is the part here. It's unrealistic, and it's destructive. I mean, it would basically, for this worldwide census to happen, it would disrupt the entire empire. Commerce would stop. Think of the travel. Travel back then was very expensive and difficult and dangerous. it was really a luxury. It was not simple. Obviously there was no paved road there. Back then there were no cars. It was difficult. Could shepherds leave their flocks? Could farmers leave their crops for the census? This would break up families.
And the other thing is that I mean, going back to the why does he travel to the his ancestral home where David's from? Why at that point? Because why not further back than that? When they're someplace else, or within the last 500 years, where his ancestors might be someplace else. Like, why does it have to be like that little sliver of time 1,000 years ago where he had one ancestor living in a certain place, and not any time farther back or any time more recent than that? It's very selective of that one region or that one time.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, as in today, many Jews would be considered a descendant of David. Imagine how crowded Bethlehem. Bethlehem, is a small town. You hear the Christmas carol, little town of Bethlehem. You'd have all these descendants of David all crowding into Bethlehem. Again, for what? I mean, the Roman Empire was very efficient. They would not have such a crazy demand, and there's nothing really in a Jewish culture or anything that says, well, you have to go back to your tribal land to be counted. The Jewish people were pretty much against censuses. When they actually had this census in 6 CE, they went nuts. They had a major revolt, and a lot of Jews are simply against census, and there's no record of having any census under Herod. In the Old Testament, we have a situation where David called for a census, and one of the Old Testament books actually says that the devil, Satan, enticed David to have the census. So it shows, how much biased they were against having a what's called a capitation tax, based on individual people. So I'm going to get into more detail about that a little later. The one thing Luke does get right, though, is yes, there was indeed a census in 6 CE when Quirinius became the governor of Syria. That is a well-established historical fact. So he got that right, but again, it was a local census, not a empire-wide, not a worldwide census. All right. So that's point one, where it contradicts the historical record. Now, let's look for an internal consistency here. I'm now going to compare the Luke nativity story to the Matthew nativity story. So I'm not going to read you the Matthew nativity story, but I'll just compare the points of the stories to each other. So in Matthew, Jesus is born in Bethlehem under the reign of Herod the Great. There's no mention of Nazareth nor census. Where in Luke, they live in Nazareth and travel to Bethlehem for the census under the reign of Quirinius. That's 10 years later. So not only is there a 10-year gap between the story, it's under different rulers. In Matthew, Magi go to Jerusalem to meet Herod, and then to Bethlehem to visit Jesus in his house. No mention of a manger nor shepherds. Where in Luke, Mary puts newborn Jesus into a feeding trough, that's the manger, because there was no room in the inn. Shepherds visit the new Messiah, no mention of Magi. In Matthew, Joseph is warned about Herod, and they flee to Egypt and stay until Herod dies. Herod then slaughters all male children to the age of 2 in Bethlehem. Where in Luke, after 8 days, Jesus is circumcised in Bethlehem. There's no mention of the slaughter of the innocents, nor fleeing to Egypt. In Matthew, after Herod dies, after Herod's death, they leave Egypt to return to Bethlehem, but here that Archelaus, his son, replaced Herod, so they once again avoid Jerusalem and travel to Galilee. Where in Luke, after 40 days, the family goes to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices according to Mosaic law, and went back to Jerusalem every year after. So in Luke, they visit Jerusalem, and every year since then they come back to Jerusalem. Where in the Matthew story, they don't want to get anywhere near Jerusalem because they're afraid that Herod and then later his son will kill the baby Jesus, because they see him as a threat to their kingship. And then lastly, in Matthew, they settle in the town of Nazareth in Galilee during the reign of Archelaus. Where in Luke, after the sacrifices and public acknowledgments in Jerusalem, they return to Nazareth during the reign of Quirinius. So again, two different eras. So just to summarize the contradictions of the two stories. One, the time periods are different. There's a 10-year difference. In Matthew, Jesus is born in the reign of Herod and goes to Nazareth in the reign of Archelaus. No census is mentioned. In Luke, Jesus is born in the reign of Quirinius for the census, and the family returns to Nazareth in the same reign. The location of the birth. Well, in Matthew, it's in a house, and the Magi visit. In Luke, it's a place where animals feed and the shepherds visit. And then and then 3, the action they take after the birth. In Matthew, they avoid Jerusalem. There's a sense of danger in this story because of Herod. There's a slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem, and they flee to Egypt and then Nazareth.
And I think one of the things is that to bring up as well is that we have historical evidence that there was a census in 6 CE, right?
Yes.
But we don't have historical evidence of a mass genocide of every 2-year or every toddler within the region at that time.
Right. In Matthew, it says that Herod slaughtered all male children in Bethlehem and in the vicinity of Bethlehem up to age 2, and we have no historical recording of that at all. You think something that brutal, that barbaric would have been recorded in history, yet we don't have that. Critical scholars believe that basically Matthew is borrowing from the Moses story, because he saw Jesus as the second Moses, so he's basically paralleling the story of Moses. That's basically where we believe the slaughter of the innocents came from. And just to finish up, so in Luke, there's no sense of danger. They visit Jerusalem 41 days later and every year after. So again, in Matthew, they're avoiding Jerusalem. They won't get anywhere near it. But in Luke, they 41 days later, they go to Jerusalem. They offer their, that's for 40 days, it's a purification for Mary, because apparently when you give birth, you're dirty with sin or whatever, and you have to go through a purification stage and then offer sacrifices in the Jerusalem temple after 40 days when you're considered pure, and they come back for Passover every year after. So those are the internal contradictions. Okay, so to sum up, we have conflicts here with the Chicago Statement. So the Luke Nativity story is not inerrant. One, because it contradicts known historical fact, and this would be in conflict of Article 12 of the Chicago Statement on biblical inerrancy and Article 14 of the Chicago Statement on biblical hermeneutics. And then 2, it contradicts the Matthean account, and this would be in conflict with Article 14 of the Chicago Statement of biblical inerrancy. So from that, I established that the Luke Nativity story, based on the Chicago inerrantist's own standard, is not inerrant. All right. So that is the basic issue with the story. If no one has any more comments or questions, I'll start into some of the evidence for these things, and I'll also deal with what apologists, how apologists deal with this issue, and some of the solutions that they come up with to try to resolve these contradictions. So I will start.
Well, I mean, at this point, again, I'm going to put out the message one more time, guys. Live chat. Got a lot of people watching right now. Any comments, any questions towards Floyd? Feel free to ask them, and we will try to address them. And again, if you have any problems with this, rebuttals, make a rebuttal video, send us a comment, schedule another hangout, or if you want to have this talk with Floyd, I'm sure he'll be up for it. Sorry to pimp you out like that, Floyd.
No, I welcome it.
Yeah, but I figure you do welcome this this dialogue. So yeah, just contact us, and we will try to work something out if you want to have this discussion.
Okay, I'll start with some of the resolutions, some of the solutions that apologists come up with to resolve this issue. One is they basically want to reinterpret the passages. So instead of saying while Quirinius was governor of Syria, they want to reinterpret the Greek to say before Quirinius was governor of Syria. So remember, in the Matthew story, Jesus is born under King Herod, who dies in 4 BCE, but Quirinius becomes governor of Syria in 10 CE. I'm sorry, in 6 CE. That's a 10-year difference. So, so instead of saying when Quirinius was governor, they change it to before. So basically, they want to rewrite what the verses say. So again, they appeal to the Greek to do this. Now, I don't know Greek, so I can't respond to it directly, so I have to rely on experts. So the first expert I'm going to appeal to is Dr. Daniel B. Wallace. Daniel B. Wallace is a conservative Bible scholar. He has taught Greek and New Testament courses on a graduate school level since 1979. He has a PhD from Dallas Theological Seminary and is currently a professor of New Testament studies at his alma mater. His Greek grammar beyond the basics and exegetical syntax of the New Testament has become a standard textbook in colleges and seminaries. He is the senior New Testament editor of the Net Bible, and Dr. Wallace is also the executive director for the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. So this is a conservative scholar, an evangelical scholar, whose textbook that he wrote is considered a standard textbook used in colleges and seminaries. So this is not some sort of skeptical scholar I'm referencing here. Anyway, he points that this is very technical as far as syntax and language. He says the lack of a definite article and the position of the words all make it almost impossible that the alternative translation using before could be correct. For one thing, when protos, that's the Greek word here, is used to mean before, it is followed immediately by the word it is modifying. And Richard Carrier, he's a skeptical scholar, he writes that the correct word order in English is this happened to be the first census while Quirinius was governing Syria. This is very straightforward, and all the translations render it in such a manner. as a genitive absolute further separated from prote by a verb, the Quirinius clause cannot have any grammatical connection with prote. It therefore cannot mean before in this context. The word protos is only used to mean before in John 1:15 and 1:30, yet all the grammatical requirements are met for such a meaning, which are not met in Luke 2:2. The genitive here is not a particle with subject, but a lone pronoun, and so forth. I won't read all, but it's technical. This word protos is actually found in the New Testament 101 times, and it's only translated as before twice, which is in Luke, John 1:15 and 1:30, and it has the requirements to be translated in that way, where all the other ones do not, including Luke 2:2. So that's a takeaway for what Richard Carey is saying here. Oxford professor Robin Lane Fox writes, "Nobody has ever entertained this translation for non-doctrinal reasons. It is not true to the Greek, let alone the clear Greek used in the third gospel. An alternative is to try to impugn Josephus. However, he is certainly correct to date Judea's first census in AD 6. We know independently from a well-known historian, Dio, Archelaus was banished in that year. The province was passed to direct rule by Rome, and the census belongs properly with this change in regional status." And finally, there is no English translation that interprets it as before. For example, Young's literal translation, it says, "This enrollment first came to pass when Quirinius was governor of Syria." And I just want to make a general statement. A lot of apologists, when it comes to Bible contradictions, they will bring up, "Oh, well, the original Hebrew or Greek. If you turn to that, you can resolve the problem." I think this is just a tactic, a ploy. Are we to assume that all the English translations, all these scholars that translate the Bible from the original Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek are incompetent? We're talking PhD scholars here. Are our English translations that poorly interpreted that we cannot read what it says at the face value? I could say we can turn to the Greek to kind of have better insight, but to say we cannot trust our English translations, I think it's absurd. We would have to translate it to Greek, right? So why shouldn't we trust these PhD scholars who, in this case, there's not one English translation that uses the word before? So I recommend this being a watch when apologists say, "Oh, well, we can translate it differently from the original language." Again, why can't we just trust what the English translation actually says?
Can we get to, there was two questions that were kind of brought up, and before we move too far, if any chance you want to maybe weigh in on them. Is that okay?
Sure.
Now I know it's kind of off of where we are right now, but the first one was, do you think that the census story does align with how important lineage was to the Jews, and it doesn't take a whole lot of intense research to see how intensely focused on lineage they were?
I don't see how lineage is relevant here. The purpose of the census was for taxation. They didn't care who your relatives were. They didn't care who your ancestors were. They weren't taxing David. They didn't care which one of the 12 tribes of Israel you came from. They were just interested where you lived, and they just wanted to tax you. So it's basically irrelevant. And remember, at this time, the diaspora Jews outnumbered the Judean Jews. So to require all of diaspora Jews to return to Judea, again, would simply be insane. I'm not aware of any Jewish law or custom that says you have to travel back to your ancestral homeland to be counted in a census. Like I said, many Jews were even against having a census, and I'm going to. I will address that a little later. So maybe some of these questions we are better off waiting to the end, perhaps.
Okay. The last one, actually, I don't think they're going to cover because it's just kind of a side note here. But one of the challenges that people have brought up towards the entire the nativity narratives is that Nazareth is not recorded in history within the first century.
That's not quite right. I know where this guy's going. Yes, there's actually no evidence that the town of Nazareth existed during the time of Jesus, but there is historical evidence that it existed in the late first century. So
not a really good argument.
It's worth mentioning, but it's incorrect to say there was no evidence within the first century. Yes, there is evidence within the late first century. Yes, critical scholars will bring up that there's no evidence that there was a town of Nazareth at all during Jesus' reign, and they say perhaps the New Testament writers got confused where it says that Jesus was a Nazarene, which was a type of Jew. So it really didn't refer to the town of Nazareth. But yeah, there is some archaeological evidence for the town of Nazareth, but it's in the late first century, not in the early first century, where supposedly Jesus, the earthly Jesus, lived.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. Another interpretation, what we'll do with this passage is instead of governor, they'll change it to in command. So they'll say when Quirinius was in command of Syria, rather than as a governor in Syria. So again, he became governor in 6 CE. But to say, oh well, perhaps he had a minor role. He had a minor role at the time, and that's when the census took place. Well, there's a lot of problems with that as well. From 6 to 1 BCE, he led war campaigns in Asia Minor, known as the Hammuradensian War. Boy, it's quite a word. If that's the case, why date a census in Judea by referring to his special command in a war in Asia? Why not just use the name of the actual legislate in Syria? And he was in the province of Galatia, not Syria, and by the orders of Augustus. So how does that make him in command of Syria? Even if he happened to be in Syria for parts of this campaign, we say, was he in command of Syria? Well, he might have, he would be in command of perhaps his army unit in Syria, but it'd be incorrect to say he was actually in command of Syria itself. So I think this is really reaching, for this interpretation. All right. So, I'm making a claim that the census was there was a Judean census in 6 CE. What is the actual historical evidence for such a case? Well, the first century Roman Jewish historian Josephus records it. I'm not going to read this whole passage, just the highlighted parts. It says Archelaus's country was assigned to Syria for purposes of paying tribute, and Quirinius, a man of highest rank, was sent by Caesar to take a census of things in Syria and to make an account of Archelaus's estate. And to read on, Quirinius also went to Judea since it became part of Syria to take a census of their worth and to make an account of the possessions of Archelaus. So we actually have an historical record here. Okay, when did this take place? Well, according to Josephus, the 10th year of Archelaus's rule. Again, that would be 6 CE. Remember, Herod the Great dies in 4 BCE, so add 10, that gets you to 6 CE. and also which were made in the 37th year of Caesar's victory over Antony at Actium. That's Mark Antony. And that victory at Actium happened in 31 BCE, confirmed in histories, inscriptions, papyri, and other physical evidence. So we have excellent evidence for that. We have independent account as well. Roman historian Cassius Dio independently confirms the removal of Archelaus and Judea falling under direct Roman control. That's in his Roman history. He actually, his Roman history was actually a year-by-year account of what was going on. And we have very good evidence that he did not rely on Josephus, because the language he used, he actually called Archelaus Herod the Palestinian, which is his political name, where Josephus always used Archelaus, which was his real name. So there's evidence that, yeah, that this is a truly independent account. And also, it's mentioned in the Bible itself. It's mentioned in Acts 5:37. It says, after this man, Judas of Galilee, rose up in the days of the census. So it's not the days of a census, it's days of the census, because of all the controversy, all the problems it created. And this is noted here in the books of Acts. So it's confirmed in Acts itself that this census actually happened. All right, another thing apologists will do is they'll say Quirinius was governor twice in Syria, or that there was in fact another Quirinius. So again, they need to resolve this problem is with this gap. They need to get Quirinius in the reign of Herod. And remember, it's just not years; it's reigns too. Imagine if I had two stories about myself, where one story said I was born under the president when John Kennedy was president, and then there was I had another story of when I was born when Nixon was president. Again, yeah, there's a time span there, but there's no way that I could be born under Kennedy and be born under Nixon. You know, they were presidents at different times, and obviously they were never overlapping. There was never, overlap of presidents. When one president left office or was assassinated or what have you, another president took over. So that's what they're trying to resolve here. But if Quirinius was a governor twice before his 6 CE governorship, when would that be? We actually have a record of who was governor in Syria during the reign of Herod. So we have Marcus Titus, we have Saturninus, and we have Varsis, who was the last governor of Syria while Herod was alive. So where would Quirinius fit in to this timetable? There's nowhere for him to be a governor because these other people were governor during the reign of Herod. In 12 BCE, Quirinius was promoted to consul, which is the highest elected political office of the Roman Republic, second only to the emperor. So he was busy being the consul in 12 BCE, and from 12 BCE to 1 BCE, he led a campaign against the Homonians, as I mentioned before.
Homonidensis.
Yeah, I butchered that name, didn't I? And in 1 CE, Quirinius was appointed rector of Augustus's grandson, Cassius Caesar. So again, when would he have time to serve this other earlier governorship? Justin Martyr, he was one of the early church fathers. He writes that the registers of the taxing made under Quirinius was your first procurator of Judea. So even Justin Martyr notes this. As far as his other Quirinius, this is people like in Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ. They suggest there was another Quirinius. There's simply no evidence that there was another Quirinius, and if there was, again, we have the names of the other governors during Herod's reign. When would this other Quirinius rule? And again, we simply have no evidence. This seems to be a fabricated idea.
And I think it's still fascinating that like we have all this information because of the very detailed records that Romans did keep and that historians of the time did keep.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, even if we go back to the very first line in Luke 2 there, what is it? In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire known world or Roman world or whatever. That is not accounted for. We have accounting for who the governor of this this small region was in that time frame, but we don't have any account of an entire Roman-wide census in that time.
Right. And apologists try to work around that as well. And I will be getting to that.
Sorry, my bad.
Okay, so what sort of evidence do they have to offer that Quirinius was the governor twice? Well, here's one. This is the Lapis Timbortinus. Hopefully I'm saying that right. This is something that Sir William Ramsay's found. He spent a lot of time trying to verify the historical accuracy of Luke Acts. When I say Luke Acts, it's believed the same author wrote the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts. So Luke Acts is kind of like a 2-volume set. And here it is. This is what it says. It does not identify the person. And Sir William Ramsay, he tried to argue that this shows that Quirinius governed twice. But if we look at it, if we actually read it, it doesn't identify a person. It doesn't say anyone served in Syria twice. It states that the person held 2 governorships, with the second being in Syria. And it provides no evidence that Quirinius or anyone else governed Syria twice. So they appeal to this, but I'm sorry, it's just no help. It doesn't even mention Quirinius. They're just, they're looking for anything to help support the Bible account. Here's another example they cite, the Lapis Vanitas. Okay, this is a funeral stone of someone that served under Quirinius. It confirms that the census under Quirinius happened, but it does not offer any date nor imply there was more than one. It mentions Apamene, which is the community, and it was a small town in Syria, and it says nothing about Judea itself. So this just basically acknowledges, yes, there was a census in Syria. Nothing surprising there. All right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Okay, the Antioch stones. Okay, this one, this is commemorating the offices of Gaius Julius. Oh boy, Carstanius.
Cassiano.
Cassiano, thanks.
No problem.
Both mentioning that it held the deputy management of the city Dumvrit. Yeah, in Galatia, held by Quirinius. Okay, great. So it says this is commemorating some guy who served under Quirinius. All right, nothing there. All right, this is a real interesting one. The Vardaman's coin. This is found in Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ. There was a now deceased archaeologist, or professor, I should say, Dr. Jerry Vardaman. He claimed to have discovered microscopic letters in ancient coins only visible with a magnifying glass. These micro letters supposedly confirm that Jesus was born in 12 BCE, among other claims. Biblical apologist John McRae cited Jerry Vardaman has discovered the name of Quirinius on a coin in micrographic letters, placing him as proconsul of Syria and Sicilia. Sicilia.
Cilicia.
Yes, you got it. From 11 BC until after the death of Herod. Micrographic letters. Well, people looked into this. There are no peer-reviewed papers that have ever published about these coins. No actual coins nor photographs have been produced. Note this is a drawing. They didn't have the technology to inscribe microscopic letters in coins. What would be the point? This is a very bizarre claim, which basically no scholars really take seriously. Again, no coins have actually been produced. Vardaman really never submitted any paper regards to this, but apologists, basically, John McRae took this, and apologists have noted this, and they just went with it. So, and it actually ended up in Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ. So they've been appealing to this. Quite bizarre. Micrographic letters. Very interesting.
I can't even read it in the picture that was up there. I was looking at the little highlighted section, and it still looked like nothing.
Right. I mean, did they have diamond tipped, pens back then to do such a thing? I don't think. And what would be the point? What would be the point of making it so small that you can't even read? All right. They point to a Roman 8 BCE census. Oh, maybe it's this census they're talking about. Well, a census of Roman citizens would have no effect in Judea because it was under Herod's rule. So basically, it's irrelevant. It would not affect the Jews at the time. There's another problem. It would put Jesus at age 30 in 22 CE, which would be 6 years before Luke said he was 30 in Luke 3:1, which was the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius, which is 28 to 29 CE. And Josephus dates the census, we've already went over this, at 6 CE as the 10th year of Archelaus' government and in the 37th year of Caesar's defeat of Mark Antony and Actium. So again, it simply wouldn't be Herod's kingdom would not be affected by this 8 BCE Roman census, since it was only for Roman citizens. Okay, they'll say, well, yeah, perhaps the census began under Herod, but ended with Quirinius. They'll say the census happened under Herod. Well, there's no evidence that there was a tax paid per person, in Herod's kingdom. Josephus never once mentioned any Herodian census, despite covering in detail every year of Herod's 37-year reign. Herod paid an annual tribute to Rome, and it didn't matter how many citizens paid. Herod's kingdom was taxed by assigning fixed annual tributes to each territory, and thus not based on a census. Censuses were expensive to administer and significantly an inconvenience to the population. And as I mentioned before, Jews had a history of hostility to a peacetime census. For example, in Samuel 2:24 and in Chronicles 21, it says Satan incited David to count the people of Israel. And as they revolted in the census in 6 CE, some Jews appealed to a verse in Hosea 1:10 as a rejection of per capita, per person taxes, where it says, "Yet the number of the people of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which shall never be measured nor numbered." So they just simply appeal to this verse against Scripture. Where where like Herod got money, well, instead of the census tax, they basically got their money through land taxes, which were based on records of property ownership. They also got money through tariffs and other taxes on transportation. Imagine you're passing over a gateway or a bridge. They would hit you up, with a toll, and they would be levied on the spot. They'd also charge rent for royal land or animals that were collected through contractual agreements. Again, there'd be fixed tributes assessed on townships or metropolises, which would be due in full no matter who actually paid it. So that's basically how they do it. And again, Herod had to pay an annual tribute to Rome.
I think, and this actually kind of circles back to one of the questions I was asked earlier as well, with the importance of lineage to the Jewish people at the time, and wouldn't that be why they wanted, want to go back to their ancestral home or anything like that? And the response to that is simple, that these things were inconvenient to begin with. Is the Jewish people didn't want to do these to begin with. It would have been even more of an inconvenience for them to travel back to their ancestral home, obviously. So why would that even be a suggestion? Like, the Romans wouldn't have put that into place because that just wasn't the way that they did these things, and they wouldn't have done that to appease the Jewish people that where they thought that the lineage was important to them, because it actually ended up being more of an inconvenience to them in the end.
Right. Yeah. There's no good reason. There's no practical reason, and again, it wouldn't make sense to the Jews either. And again, most Jews weren't even living in Palestine. The diaspora Jews were spread out throughout the Roman Empire. British scholar Giza Vermes writes, there was no evidence that such a census occurred in the kingdom of Herod, i.e. Judea, who as a client king would have been exempt from censuses. And again, a client kingdom retains its independence while paying a set and agreed annual tribute to Rome. This was done earlier in Jewish history as well. For example, King Ahaz of Judah paid tribute to Assyria, and King Jehoiakim of Judah paid tribute to Egypt. Basically, it's like extortion money. It's like you're paying money to the mafia, so to speak. You pay us, and and we'll protect you. Basically what was going on there. Political reasons.
Yeah, well, we'll keep you as a you get to maintain your own puppet government, but give us money.
Yeah. And of course, over time they get sick of you, and they come in and come in and invade and take your treasury away. That happens throughout history. And bottom line is, Luke does not say it. Luke refers to the census to an Augustan decree and the governorship of Quirinius. It simply doesn't mention it starting under Herod. Okay. Apologists try to, we were talking about this a few times earlier. They try to justify the idea of people returning to their ancestral homeland. And this is something that is found in Lee Strobel's book, and also in Josh McDowell's book, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. There's a 104 CE Egyptian census decree. They found a papyrus, and this is what the actual papyrus says. The Egyptian papyrus recording a census in 104 CE explicitly states that since registration by household is imminent, it is necessary to notify all for any reason are absent from their districts to return to their own homes, that they may carry out the ordinary business of registration. So apologists will claim, aha, look it, this is saying that they should travel back to their ancestral homes. Wait, it does? It says registration by household, return to their own homes. So what this is basically saying is, hey, if you're away from your home, go back home, for the census to be counted. It's logical. Imagine, there's a census in the United States. I live in Pennsylvania. Imagine I was in California at the time on vacation or away for business. They would say, go back to Pennsylvania to be counted. Uh, but again, they try to use this as support for some reason to go back to your ancestral home. It doesn't say it. They tried to move up the time that Herod died. They'll claim that Herod was still alive in 2 or 1 BCE. Well, most scholars have agreed that Herod died at the end of March or early April in 4 BCE. Josephus states that Varus, not Quirinius, was governor when Herod died. This is from his Jewish wars. Josephus records that Herod died 37 years after Rome proclaimed him king, and 34 years after he assumed the crown. Again, we have independent corroboration from the records of Augustus and Cassius Dio. Josephus consulted Herod's memoirs directly and others who wrote about Herod's reign on this. Coins corroborate this, including the reigns of Herod's successors Philip, Antipas, and Archelaus. The reign of Archelaus was further corroborated by Cassius Dio, as I mentioned before. Coins attested to the governorship of Varus ended in 4 BCE after Herod died. And the Melgilet Tanit, hope I'm saying that right, which is the Jewish scroll of fasting, records Herod's death. So we have all this evidence of when Herod actually died. Okay, from there, apologists will attack Josephus as a reliable source. They'll say, Luke is a great historian. We cannot trust Josephus, particularly when he contradicts the Bible. I was discussing this with one apologist recently, and he said, Josephus, he's a Roman historian. He was writing in the 90 CEs in Rome and in Greek. Why would we think this guy is reliable? Implying that he's disconnected from these events. He's writing in Rome in Greek. He's a Roman historian. Is that accurate? Well, let's learn a little bit about Josephus. Titus, maybe help me out just with this name, Saka. Flavius Josephus. He was actually born Joseph ben Mattiyahu, or Joseph, son of Matthias. He was a 1st century Roman Jewish scholar. Okay, he was a Jewish army leader and historian. He was born and raised in Jerusalem, which is a Roman Judea at the time, from a wealthy, well-educated family. He spoke Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. So he was born and raised in Jerusalem, not in Rome. He was the son of Matthias, an ethnic Hebrew of priestly descent, born the year of the Judean census and revolt. He had first-hand knowledge of the different Jewish sects at the time. His mother came from the royal ancestry of the Hasmonean dynasty. So again, Josephus was raised in this political environment. His parents were in the mix, so to speak, and so they would know the political happenings of the time. He fought the Romans in the first Jewish-Roman War of 66 to 73 as a Jewish military leader in Galilee until his capture in 67 CE. So he witnessed the Jewish revolt firsthand. So not only did Josephus record history, he was actually part of the history in the 1st century. After he was captured, he became a slave, basically, and an interpreter for Vespasian. After Vespasian became Caesar, he was granted Roman citizenship, He became an advisor of and friend of Vespasian's son Titus. He had access to the emperor's libraries, military reports, and court records from Herod and other rulers in Palestine. His major works were the Jewish War, which he wrote in 75 CE, and the Antiquity of Jews in 94 CE. Josephus' principal source for the reign of Herod is the histories of Nicholas of Damascus, who was a close friend of Herod, who in turn relied on first-hand knowledge and Herod's own memoirs. And Josephus consulted Herod's memoirs directly and others who wrote about Herod's reign. If they're going to say that Josephus was an unreliable source, then they're going to have to say the Book of Acts was unreliable as well, because the Book of Acts, a lot of the events recorded in the Book of Acts matches Josephus. For example, in Acts 5:37, it mentions Judas of Galilee who rose up in the day of the census. This matches Josephus's the Jewish wars, where he mentions Judas. They both mentions the same three rebel leaders. They both mention the death of Agrippa as God's revenge, as accepting praise as God, as a God, delusions of grandeur from him. They both mention the association of Agrippa II with Bernice. They both mention the association of Felix with Drusilla. And they both mention a famine in the reign of Claudius. I can go on and on about how they mention the same event. So if you're going to say Josephus is unreliable, then I'm afraid you're going to have to say Luke was unreliable as well. And with that, can we say, was Luke a good historian? How does Luke compare to other historians of the day? First off,
and one of the main problems with that too is, I mean, like you said, Josephus is kind of like one of the go-to people for extra biblical evidence for the existence of Christ to begin with.
Right. If you were a first century historian, Josephus would be one of the guys you would go to learn about the history of the period. He was in the mix of it. He would be a go-to guy to learn about the history of first century Palestine if you're a historian. Let's take a look at Luke now. Was Luke a good historian? Well, he never identifies himself or his qualifications. We basically don't know who the guy is. He never names or evaluates his sources, compared to a good historian would, like Arian at the time. He takes a source that he used, namely the Gospel of Mark, and he changes it for theological reasons. He never discusses or reveals his methodology, like Suetonius. In Luke's prologue, that's the beginning of the Luke Gospel, he does not say he actually spoke to any eyewitnesses or even knew them. Luke is saying that he has written down what others have brought together from the tradition that was handed down. Luke does this is so Theophilus. Am I saying that right? Theophilus, yeah, can assess the truth of what he already heard. And here is a error Luke made in the Book of Acts. He has Gamaliel, supposedly giving a speech in the early or mid 30s where he mentions the uprising of Theudas, which did not occur till some 10 years after this speech, and compounds the error by implicitly dating the census and uprising of Jews Galilean after Theudas. So this is a gross anachronism. It does not match the time period. Did Luke write fiction? Well, there appears to be a lot of fictional speeches within the Book of Acts. There are 24 speeches, adding to 300 of the 1,000 verses in Acts. they're considered fictional because of the historical anachronisms, which I mentioned one. The speeches are not fitting the immediate narrative context. It's unhistorical presentation of Pauline theology. There's structural similarities. What I mean by that is that Paul would give a speech, and then Peter would give a speech, and both speeches would have the same structure. They were constructed the same way. Elements of these speeches only made sense only to the reader, and then also because of contemporary historiographical convention. This is important. What this means is that it was very common among the Hellenized historians of the time to actually make up speeches and put them into the mouths of the person they're talking about. This was a very common practice, actually. Josephus did as well. So I'm not singling out Luke here, but this was a common practice among the Hellenized historians at the time. They use speeches as a means to provide the reader with insight into the total situation, the specific factors of that historical moment or the character of the speaker. So this was a very common practice, and other historians did it as well, and Luke seemed to do it as well. So that's a key that these stories are simply fiction. And this would be in conflict of Article 14 of the Chicago Statement of Biblical Hermeneutics, where it states that the Bible writers themselves did not write this thing. And all right, that is my evidences and how I respond to apologists. Do I have anything more? All right. Yeah, if you have no other comments, I can actually finish up my presentation here. If you don't have anything more.
Well, that's we'll save everything to the end. I mean, again, let's just bring this up. I mean, for anybody that's watching, for the audience that we do have right now, if you have any questions at all, send them to me, message them to me. We will address them after Floyd's done his presentation here. As well as if anybody has, is watching this later on, and you have any problems or objections to the case that Floyd's been putting out here, contact us. We want this dialogue. We want to talk about this. I know Floyd would be more than happy to. So make a rebuttal video. Send me a message. Send Floyd a message. We can work out a one-on-one discussion or a panel discussion regarding the topics that have been discussed today. So encourage everybody to do that if they want, and yeah, that's about it. So I mean, if you want to finish now, Floyd, that's great.
Yeah. All right. So what we have here is these are basically ad hoc rationalizations. They're what if could be claims. It's like how can we resolve these things? Oh, what if this? Oh, it could be that, but we basically have no real evidence for it. We have no real support. So the question we have to ask ourselves is: should we weigh could have happened this way accounts against actual evidence that it happened differently? I don't think so. We can't give credence to could have happened this way accounts when we have actual evidence that says otherwise. Author Tom Stark.
This isn't even an argument from silence. This is a straight up. We have the counter view from this.
Yeah, exactly. Author Tom Stark writes, makes a good point, and writes that inerrantists utilize the historical grammatical hermeneutic. That's the method of interpreting scripture to find the original content that the author intended, through a historical context of the time and the grammatical method that you use. That's what historical grammatical hermeneutic means. They utilize this hermeneutic until it reveals a discrepancy between two texts, or between one text and a particular fact that we cannot bring ourselves to deny, at which point we revert to dogmatic interpretation. by virtue of the controlling presupposition that canonical scripture should always be interpreted on the basis that it is infallible and inerrant. The Chicago inerrantists are forced to conclude that it is the interpretation that is wrong, not the text itself. Sorry about that. To inerrantists, the best interpretation is ultimately not the historical grammatical interpretation, but the one that does not threaten the doctrine of inerrancy. An example of this, obvious example is the Bible teaching of geocentrism and a flat Earth. Scripture seems to apply geocentrism, that the Earth is fixed, it rests on pillars and so forth, and it applies a flat Earth. But of course, it's undeniable now that the Earth goes around the sun, and the Earth is a globe. So they're forced to reinterpret Scripture to match that. So again, the best interpretation is one that doesn't threaten, the doctrine of inerrancy. So they abandon the historical grammatical method, which they claim to follow, when it threatens, their precious doctrine of inerrancy. What are some scholar views on the Luke nativity story? I'll mention a few here in closing. Daniel Schwartz of Hebrew University writes, "It seems fair to say that the scholarly consensus today, shared even by many conservative Christian scholars, is that Luke is wrong." New Testament scholar Luke Timothy Johnson writes, "On the basis of exhaustive research, Luke's dates seem to be out of kilter. Quirinius and the census under him do not match the other dates." The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops writes, so this is a whole group of Catholic bishops in the United States, "Although universal registrations of Roman citizens are tested in 28 BC, 8 BC, and AD 14, and enrollments in individual provinces of those who are not Roman citizens are also attested, such a universal census of the Roman world under Caesar Augustus is unknown outside the New Testament. Moreover, there are notorious historical problems connected with Luke's dating the census when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and the various attempts to resolve the difficulties have proved unsuccessful." And
so I have one question on that point, though.
Yeah.
And that is does this pull into question the date that these Gospels were actually written now? Because if people are thinking now that some of these things were written, 30, 40, or years after the death of Christ, or even in the lifetime of Christ, or shortly thereafter, as some people have said, these details are things that people at the time should have known about. They would have been sitting there and saying, "What census in 6 AD?" It should have been so obvious to the people at the time if it was actually written within a reasonably short time period of when they say they were supposed to be written.
Well, again, there actually was a census in 6 CE under Quirinius, but again, it was local to Syria and Judea. So it made history, with the Jewish revolt, under Judas the Galilean. So they were aware of it, but all the other problems, would be a problem. And the farther away the gospel is written, the less they would question it. That would be the case. I mean, obviously, if the Gospels were written closer to the events, it would be easier to check. But the basic view of scholars of when Luke Acts were written is basically I would say the majority of them believe, perhaps Luke Acts was written around like 85 to 90. Some put it earlier, some put it later. In fact, some scholars even believe that Luke used Josephus to write his material. N.F. Gear writes in a letter to me. F.F. Bruce is a very conservative scholar. F.F. Bruce concedes that conservative apologists have been too eager to declare Luke's inerrancy. So eager was M.L. Ramsey to prove Luke correct about the enrollment in Bethlehem that he, according to Bruce, unwisely damaged his well-founded reputation as a very considerable scholar. In his Anchor Bible commentary, Catholic scholar J.A. Fitzmyer lists other historical mistakes in Luke's writing and offers the most definitive argument against Ramsey's claim about the famous Christmas census. The Encyclopedia of Theology, a concise Sacramonium Mundi, states the difficulties can only be briefly indicated. Jesus is said to have been born under Herod the Great when Quirinius was governor of Syria, Luke 2:1. But there is no evidence that Quirinius was governor during Herod's lifetime. None of the explanations of this contradiction so far suggested it is satisfactory. And I will finish with, again, Oxford professor Robin Lane Fox. He pretty much sums it up. He writes, the scale of the Gospel's error is now clear. The first census did occur under Quirinius, but it belonged in 86 when Herod the Great was long dead. It was a local census in Roman Judea, and there was no decree from Caesar Augustus to all the world. In 86, Joseph of Nazareth would not have registered at Bethlehem. As a Galilean, he was not under direct Roman rule and was exempt from Judea's registration. His wife had no legal need to leave home. Luke's story is historically impossible and internally incoherent. I'll say that again. Luke's story is historically impossible and internally incoherent. It clashes with his own date for the Annunciation, which he places under Herod, and with Matthew's long story of the Nativity, which also presupposes Herod the Great as king. It is therefore false. Right. Thank you very much.
That's pretty much it. I'm canvassing for questions right now. I've typed in the external chat as well as announcing it right here. What we're going to do is that if there's no questions that are going to be popping up here in the next minute or so, is we're going to close this hangout and down, and it's going to be, this is going to be the complete presentation of whether or not the nativity story in the Gospel of Luke is inerrant, and we are going to open up a second hangout, if people are welcome to jump in, we can carry on with the conversation there, and or talk about whatever. Talk about how amazing Floyd is, or how amazing I am. Those are totally acceptable topics as well.
But not how amazing Xbox is. It's cool. It's cool.
You don't even know if we exist yet, Xbox.
I know, it's already assumed in the question.
Yeah. Just watch the external chat here. We're going to post the link there, as well as we'll link it from the Deep in the Dogma G+ page. Floyd, thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was great. So that's about it. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thanks for having me.